Grayzone Warfare is easily the most exciting first-person shooter I've played in years. But it might have a significant problem, and I don't think it's any fault of the game's designers themselves, but I think the game that eventually releases won't be the game that you see right now. So first things first, I haven't actually done a kind of impressions video about Grayzone Warfare. I posted some gameplay yesterday. That was a super fun game. Heartily recommend you go check out yesterday's video. But I haven't talked about my feelings on the game. For anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's actually kind of hard to describe Grayzone Warfare without annoying somebody. I think of it as basically an extraction shooter that sits somewhere between DMZ and Tarkov. It's much more immersive and complicated and slower paced than DMZ is, but it's much more accessible and much less janky than Tarkov is. I know there's some people arguing that it's not really an extraction shooter because you don't go back to a menu or something, but that's a very boring conversation. Essentially, in Grayzone Warfare, you spawn into a base of one of 3 factions. And actually, this is where one small problem comes into the game. You pick your faction when you load up the game for the first time, and it does say, oh, you can't change it until there's a proper server wipe or anything like that. But they really mean it. Like, I had it in my head, oh, if I picked one faction, maybe I'd just be able to start a new character or something like that next time. But no, there is no way to change your faction once you're in the game, and you can only team up with people in the same faction as you. So when this game comes out, make sure you pick the same faction as everybody that you want to play with. If you've got 2 friendship groups that want to pick different factions for some reason, I've got absolutely no idea what you're meant to do. But anyway, you spawn into one of these bases, one of the 3 factions on the map, and then you pick up missions in a really similar way to how you do in DMZ or Tarkov. There's a bunch of vendors and you can take missions from them. The first few are just like, go here or pick up this item. Later on it starts being like, hey, kill this specific enemy, or take this item into the battlefield and try and place it in this specific situation, but if you lose it, you're kind of in trouble. And then the genius part begins. Once you've picked up those missions, all of that is in a base where you can wander around, you can also buy weapon parts and change your loadouts and all of that kind of thing. You then call in a helicopter to a landing zone. You unlock landing zones by visiting them, but obviously you might be able to find a friend with the landing zone you need. And at the beginning, you've got 3 landing zones surrounding this kind of starter town. So you have those landing zones, you pick the one you want to go to, and then a helicopter actually physically comes to the place where you are, picks you up, you have to get on board, and then you go over to that landing zone. And there's no loading screens, there's no instances or anything, you're still in the same map. And this, I think, is the genius of the game. It feels a bit like an MMO, you know, the lobby that you were just in, the kind of base that you started in, that exists within the same game world as the place where you're going to do your missions. And the lobbies for all of the enemy factions exist in that same game world too. In the video I posted yesterday, we actually went to one of the enemy team bases. You can't access any landing zones anywhere around there to try and, you know, stop people griefing, I guess. But we could go straight into their base, the place where they accept missions and get their gear and everything, and kill all of the guards, and we would have been able to kill players, if any had been spawning when we were there. But you go do your missions, whatever they are, and then you call a helicopter back in to take you back to the base. Or if you want, you can just walk back to the base. It doesn't take that long. You can just go by foot. And that's the basic loop. Over time, you'll start getting missions that send you out into more contested parts of the map, so places where 2 different factions will have missions going to the same place, or maybe all 3. And then obviously the game gets more difficult as you're having to deal with fighting other players. If you die, and death can come instantly if you get shot in the head or the heart, if you die, you drop all of your stuff on the ground, so kind of Dark Souls style, because it's just one kind of persistent world, you can just go back to where you died and try and pick up your gear. Obviously, if you got killed by AI, it's likely to still be there. If you got killed by players, they've probably stolen it, so you need to try and kill them if you want to get any of it back. So far, from the 12 hours or so I've played of this game, it's a super engaging loop, it's a lot of fun, and it's got really nice pacing where kind of you've got all of these slow sections where you're travelling to where the missions are, maybe you're on a helicopter, maybe you're just walking across the landscape, and it gives you time to kind of chat to people. So often I've teamed up with random people who know where the missions are that I need, and we'll just kind of get to know each other and chat for a little bit on the way, and then you get into a big gunfight, you know, you're fighting the AI or you're fighting players areas or anything like that. If you die, you can just hop straight back into the game and try and get your stuff back, or buy some new stuff and try and do something else. And if you win a fight, then you can pick up all of that gear and take it back to the base and kind of, celebrate your victory on the helicopter back. The little moments of action that often don't tend to last more than a couple of minutes, interspersed with kind of big slow sections, for some people might make the game a little bit slow and boring, but for me it's just a perfect pace where, especially when I'm streaming, I get to talk to chat a little bit, I get to hang out, I get to explore things, try out different things, and then there'll just be little sort of bursts of focus and activity, and then you go back to talking about what just happened or what you're going to do next. It leads to proper narratives, as opposed to something like Warzone, where, you get a 20-minute game and it's pretty much just action, 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 just like constant fighting, especially in something like Resurgence. There you don't really get any time to digest any of the things that you're doing or you're about to do. You're just reacting all the time, and it means, for me at least, a game of Warzone is often pretty forgettable. I don't remember what's happened, whereas in my 12 hours with Greyzone Warfare so far, I've got so many funny little stories, just cool things that happened, unusual things that happened, and a lot of them are made up of just these tiny little bursts of a couple of minutes of action, but then we were talking about them for ages afterwards, and that's kind of what makes it stick in the memory. So all of that is super positive, and it helps that the game looks absolutely gorgeous. It's not optimized very well at the moment, like I'm on a 3080 and I struggle to get 60 frames a second. I am playing at 4K, but that's just because I tried putting it down to 1080p and got exactly the same frame rate. So I think it's maybe a CPU issue. I'm on a Ryzen 9 5900X, which isn't a bad CPU by any means, but it's not kind of top of the range. But yeah, 60 frames a second is kind of unobtainable for me at the moment, regardless of what I put my settings to. Generally in the towns I'm at like 40 frames a second, and sometimes if I'm looking down a scope that drops down to like 20. So performance is not good right now, but this is a super early version of the game. I'm sure optimization will come. Obviously Unreal Engine 5, there's not that many games that use it, so I think learning how to optimize that is kind of a new thing, and we haven't had special Nvidia drivers for this or anything like that yet. But regardless of the crappy frame rate, it does still look absolutely amazing. And it's not just the kind of technical aspects of it, of having all of the foliage and everything moving and the incredible lighting. It's more the artistic style of it. They've decided to make this in a fictional country that's quite a lot like Laos, and it looks so much like Southeast Asia. You've got a real kind of mix of environments, even though it's all kind of semi-rainforesty. You've got the big rice fields, you've got some quite built-up towns, some smaller villages. We went to a bunker today. There's a real kind of mix of environments, and they all look super interesting. There's a ton of environmental storytelling. There's a couple of things I don't really like how all the starter towns are the exact same, so they're just kind of copy and pasted 3 times on the map. But I suppose in theory, you don't really have any reason to go to the enemy starter towns unless you were trying to grief people. So it shouldn't affect many people who are playing the game. But yeah, other than that, I've just been blown away by this. So let's start talking about the big problem with the game. The big thing that I think could ruin everybody's fun. And that's that the game we're playing now is not the game you'll be playing when it opens to the public. Right now, the way they've organized this test is that they sent out keys to I think 50 different creators. Maybe they added a few more after time. I saw the number 50 at some point. But not many creators anyway around the world. And then they gave those creators like free keys to give to their friends as well, so they could get their squad on. This means that right now in the game, you've got very, very few people. I think in the European and American regions, there's only like 2 servers, and a lot of the time only one of those servers is full. And that means that everybody is running into people they know all the time. Like nearly every time I've hopped onto a server, I've run into Tactical Brit or Stod or Westy. Sometimes you'll meet really helpful, friendly people in the game. Like I met a streamer called Azzy who helped me with some missions, and then I got back on today and he was there again. So I was like, oh, hey, I'm doing this mission. He was like, yep, let's go, let's get on a helicopter, let's go together. It's been a super cool experience for me, just being able to chat to people, everybody helping each other with missions. When you get into PvP fights, you recognize people. I killed someone today, and someone came into my chat and was like, oh, you just killed Glorious. And apparently there's a streamer called Glorious E who's a big Tarkov streamer. And stuff like that is a really cool experience. But obviously you're not going to have that when public access hits. You're not going to be running into people you know anywhere near as much once there's like hundreds of thousands of people split across thousands of different servers. And there's also some other differences. Because most of these keys went out to creators and people the creators knew, a lot of us have slightly more powerful PCs than I would say the average user. Because we want to show games off, we want our streams to look really nice. And since for a lot of us it's our full-time job, we want to spend money on our rigs. So all of those optimization problems, you're still seeing them from people who have pretty high-end hardware in the first place. Once that opens up to the public, I think it's going to be much worse. I don't think the average user has like a 3080 or a 4080. I think you're also going to see a lot less interaction. Content creators by our nature are pretty chatty. We're happy to talk to other people. We're happy to sort of get in weird situations with strangers because it's content. It's a lot of fun. Once you've got a load of people who are all off in their own private discords, people who aren't willing to get talking to other people, who just want to kind of grind their way through the game, that's going to make it much less interesting. The world's going to feel a lot less inviting when you've got a bunch of people in your base or a bunch of people on your faction but around your mission areas who just aren't interested in helping you at all. There's also the issue of griefing. Right now, content creators aren't massively keen on griefing each other. Obviously, sometimes it can be a little bit funny and it can make for good content, but generally people know how frustrating it would be to have your content ruined by someone else messing around, so they try not to do it. There's plenty of ways to grief in this game. Like I said, we went to an enemy base yesterday. We could have, if we wanted, just hung around on a hillside over that base, sniping players as soon as they spawn back in. And then when they respawn, we could just do it again. We didn't do that because that would be absolutely horrific, but that's something you could do. You could hang around the locations where missions need to be done in the starter towns and just kill players as they walk in. There's an endless potential for griefing in this game, and while at the moment everyone's kind of, got a bit of a sense of community and don't want to mess with each other too much, once that's open to the public, there's going to be people who the only pleasure they get from the game is ruining other people's games. And then finally, and I think this is the biggest problem with the game and the biggest problem with doing tests like the one they're doing right now. For me, games are the most fun when people don't know what they're doing. It's a huge amount of fun trying to work out where you need to go for these missions, which weapons work well. When you find something new, you're like, oh, I'm not sure if this is good or not. All of that exploration and experimentation is a huge part of the fun of the game. Now, because we've been able to play it for a week, and some people I know have already been creating maps and creating guides, for a lot of people in the public, when they first get to play this game, everyone's already going to have worked out everything. Everyone's going to know where all of the locked doors are, where the best places to get loot are, how to complete every mission. And while you might be able to have some discipline and some self-control and be able to kind of stop yourself from looking at those guides and those maps and things like that, I know personally, I'm a little bit weak. If I got a little bit frustrated, I was looking for something for 10 minutes and I couldn't find it, I'd probably be very tempted to look stuff up. I think you'll get much less of this feeling of kind of asking other people back at base, hey, do you know how to get into this particular building? Or do you know where the body you need to find for this particular mission is? And then you all jump in a helicopter together and go have a look for it. You're not going to have that kind of thing, because if you do ask someone else, they'll just be like, oh yeah, it's over there. I looked at the map online. And that's going to be it. This has been a big problem kind of in society. Well, not a big problem, but an annoying problem across society right now anyway. You don't have friends who are experts in a certain thing, so you go to them if you want to look something up or you want to find something out. Instead, you just Google it, because Google will just tell you the answer straight away. I feel it's cut out a lot of kind of social interactions. And within this game, once everybody's worked everything out, I think it's going to make the game considerably less fun. And obviously, people are already working all of that stuff out. Now, all of this being said, I think there are some things the developers could do to mitigate some of these problems. The big one, and I've always said this about Call of Duty Easter eggs, is to randomize as much as possible. To have so many of the missions where you can't possibly just follow a map. You can't just follow a YouTube guide. Instead, there should be some kind of hints in the mission text. So like right now, there's a mission where you have to find some hideouts that are marked by some graffiti. You have to work out that it is marked by graffiti, that's what they're using to mark the hideouts. And then you can find the buildings. If which buildings they were randomized, every day or every week or whenever, maybe every time a server loads up, that would be a bit more interesting, because then you'd still have to be talking to other people on your specific server when you're playing to ask if anybody's seen some graffiti around or something like that. And I think that sort of style of doing missions could make it much more interesting for people who are going through, where their specific mission hasn't been worked out by somebody else because they've got a slightly randomly generated one. In terms of encouraging strangers to work together when it's not just content creators who are playing this, I think it'd be really cool if in the bases there was some kind of notice board where you could just put up a notice saying, hey, you're doing this mission, anybody else need it? And then other people could just join, like a looking for group thing, like what they have in Destiny right now. And I think they have something similar in Call of Duty as well. But a physical notice board in the game, in the base, where you could just say, hey, I'm on this mission, I'm going to go do it in like 10 minutes. Anybody want to join? Let me know. And then you could squad up and go do stuff. Just things in the game that encourage people to team up with randomers and to use voice comms. Maybe have a little notice when you load up the game saying, hey, we'd prefer it if you didn't use Discord or TeamSpeak or whatever. That would be pretty cool too. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below as always. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to be making a bunch more Greyzone Warfare content. Obviously, the beta ends in a couple of days, but I'll be streaming it for the next few days. So hopefully I'll see you then. Goodbye.